From exile to marital affairs, cannibalistic family dinners, literal backstabbing, and the most disturbing prophecies that we have covered to date. The curse of the House of Atreus involves every piece of nightmare fuel you can imagine, and is one of the most brutal sibling rivalries that you'll possibly ever hear. Let me introduce you to the two brothers, Atreus and Thyestes. Welcome to part 2 of The Curse of the House of Atreus, and the section of the story where I was really questioning why I was retelling this. But what would the world be without its challenges, eh? If you have not seen part 1 where we cover the first 2 generations of this curse with Tantalus and Pelops, click above or below. As for me, hello. My name is Laura, and I like to rewrite and retell myths, particularly Greek myths, in the form of stories and present them out loud. Due to all the trigger warnings, this will be told slightly more straightforward than I usually tend to, due to not wanting to creatively describe the events that unfold. They're disturbing enough on their own, and I'm trying to entertain you, not scar you. So, with that being said, and the warnings read, let's begin. As I mentioned at the end of my last video, The House of Atreus Part 1, Pelops had an affair, and from this affair he had a son named Chrysippus. Now Chrysippus was not only said to be beautiful, but also Pelops's favourite child. But that does not mean that Chrysippus had it easy. Such as during one of the Olympic chariot games that Pelops held annually, when Chrysippus was still a boy, Prince Laios of Thebes became immediately infatuated with Chrysippus once he met him, and it was during the busyness of these games he kidnapped Chrysippus and assaulted him, if you get what I'm implying. And that action ignited a war between the two cities and left Prince Laios severely punished by the gods. But because Chrysippus was Pelops's favourite child, he managed to get him back and gave him priority over all his lands, along with his brothers Atreus and Thyestes, 2 of Pelops's sons born from Pelops's wife, Hippodamia. The love that Pelops had for Chrysippus was a bright beam of light that casted shadows over his other 14 children, and especially over his wife, Hippodamia. Watching her husband and that bastard son felt like a blade scoring over her nerve to feel resentful, but most importantly, fearful. Yes, she feared, but out of her many children, that the throne and all of the Peloponnesus lands would be left to Chrysippus and not to her own children. And well, she couldn't allow that. This was her family generational land, and she was not going to let this stray boy come in and take it from her family. So she went to her sons, Atreus and Thyestes, and conspired. Oh yes, a dirty little conspiracy to remove this potential threat by killing Chrysippus. But it had to be subtle. An accident, you see. If Pelops would rage war over Chrysippus's honour, then imagine what he would do if he found out her plan. So she had to do all she could to not draw suspicion of his demise back to herself. And Atreus and Thyestes, they agreed to help her with this plan. It was bad enough they had to share the lands between each other without having this third offspring interfering with it as well. And so, in the cover of night, the brothers invited Chrysippus to meet them by a well outside. Perhaps for a nightly walk, stargazing, or just a brotherly chat. It seemed harmless enough for Chrysippus to accept. Chrysippus arrives, crunching on stones with each step. The moon that night was exceptionally bright and lit up Atreus and Thyestes' delighted faces in an eerie grey light. How strange, Chrysippus thought. They usually scowl at me or ignore me completely. Why is it today they seem so happy to see me? His stomach twisted like a drenched rag, sensing danger. Their smiles looked similar to how the prince looked at him before he took him during those Olympic Games. But Chrysippus shook his head. He didn't want to overreact or make this into something that it wasn't. Surely nothing like that would ever happen again, not with them so close to the palace and with all these guards monitoring nearby, right? Chrysippus, come closer, Atreus said, beckoning him over. When Chrysippus stood by the two brothers, Thyestes swung an arm over his shoulder. Nice night, isn't it? It is, Chrysippus agreed. There was a slow, long silence between them, smelling the salty night air, hearing the light rustle of the trees as the leaves blew in the wind, and gazing at all the stars in the sky above. But Chrysippus was not so easy to relax. He wasn't sure what exactly was going on and why they wanted him out here in the first place. He lifted his chin, ready to ask them when Thyestes spoke. Our mother has asked us to take care of you, being our brother and all. Chrysippus was surprised. Hippodamia was not shy about her hate for him, but maybe she had a change of heart. That is kind of her, Chrysippus muttered, staring at the moon. Both Atreus and Thyestes hummed, followed by another long and uncomfortable silence. One shuffled, and the other tightened his grip around Chrysippus. Know that this isn't personal, Thyestes said. Well, not entirely anyway. Chrysippus frowned, looking up at him. Atreus and Thyestes pushed Chrysippus into the well, out of sight and out of mind. And though they had all the ingredients for this to be played off as an accident, unfortunately for them, a guard was nearby. And as they were illuminated, splashed silver from the light of the moon, he witnessed the brothers committing this murder and went to the king Pelops and told him what he had saw. After discovering this devastating news, Pelops was heartbroken and he was furious. He summoned his two sons to his chamber, where they knelt before him and Hippodamia. Why? Pelops cried. He was your brother. Why would you do this? Atreus and Thyestes clenched their fists, but they remained silent. But with one quick, shifty glance to their mother, Hippodamia, who was pacing nervously behind Pelops, their father understood. It was you, wasn't it? Hippodamia jolted, arms held tight to her body, her eyes watered out of desperation and fear. She shook her head in short, fast movements, but it could not hide the horror of being caught from her face. Pelops stood in front of her, suffocating her in his shadow. Get out, he spat. Each hard word landed on her like smacks to the face. She started whimpering, pleading to stay, but Pelops turned to his sons and yelled at them too. Get out, all of you! I never want to see your faces here ever again. As the guards came in and dragged them from the room, they all yelled, screamed, demanding Pelops to reconsider, but it was no use. He stripped away their home from them as they had stripped away his favourite child. And the three of them would soon thereafter find themselves in the lands of Mycenae. Now, during this time, Mycenae was ruled by Eurystheus, whom was not only the grandson of the great hero Perseus, but was also directly involved in my personal all-time favourite myth, the 12 labours of Heracles. As the king that gave Heracles his tasks. Unfortunately for Hippodamia though, she did not last long in Mycenae. Being exiled from her own lands and the shame and heartbreak that came from this whole ordeal, she took some rope and herself with it. But Atreus and Thyestes, they lived on. Oh boy, for better or for worse, they lived on. Atreus married a woman named Aerope, with whom she had one daughter and 2 sons with. Now keep in mind that Atreus has these 2 sons because they play such an important role in one of the most famous Greek myths of all time. But don't worry, we'll circle back to this at the end. Meanwhile, Thyestes himself had 3 sons and 1 daughter, to whom, well, sources vary. And she doesn't seem to play much of a role in this myth anyway, from what I have gathered. But his children do, in the most horrific way possible. Yes. And for a while, with their new families in their new home, things were fairly calm on the lands of Mycenae. That was until the death of Eurystheus. And not just that. Come closer. There was a prophecy. Yes. Oh yes. Another damn prophecy. With the throne now empty, a troublemaker, an oracle, declared that the new ruler would be a son of Pelops. And with one simple line, the sibling rivalry began. In order to obtain favor from the gods over his belief of rightful rulership, Atreus offered Artemis, the goddess of chastity, hunt, and the moon, a sacrificial slaughter of the finest lamb within his keep. And it was on one warm, sunny day he waded his way through the white clouds of sheep, stroking their fur, feeling for which is the softest, cleanest, and the most beautiful to be sacrificed in her honor. And then he saw it, gleaming in the corner of his eye like a golden coin catching the light. Moving closer, he found a lamb with fur the color of metallic gold that glittered in the sunlight. Its fur was tightly curled and buttery soft to the touch. It was like he was a poor man who had just discovered a chest of treasure laid open, polished, gleaming, and his alone for the taking. A feeling of possession came over him, darkening his eyes and plunging through to his fingers. He had to make this golden fleece his and his alone. So Atreus grasps this golden lamb and takes it back to his home, where he gave it to his wife, Aerope, to protect and hide. For the goddess Artemis, however, who was still owed the blood of an animal, Atreus slaughtered a lesser lamb. You know, one of those boring off-white ones. And a foolish mortal move at that. Did he not recall his grandfather's test of omniscience? Which some sources say Artemis did find out about this and cursed Atreus. This family is just slapping on curses like lotions, it seems. Now this, you comfy? This is where it gets juicy. Because his wife, Aerope, was not as pure nor as faithful as she seemed. And she had a secret, quite a scandalous one at that. Upon receiving this golden lamb, she decided to gift it to her lover. And who is her lover, you may ask? Well, none other than Atreus' brother, Thyestes. I know, the drama. And it was to Atreus' surprise and delight that a mere few days later, Thyestes came to him with a proposition. This squabbling over the throne has gone on long enough, don't you agree, brother? Thyestes said. Indeed, Atreus agreed. I have a solution, Thyestes added. Let's say, I don't know, whomever obtains a golden fleece shall be the rightful ruler of Mycenae. Sounds fair, does it not? Not catching on to the suspicious timing of this proposition, Atreus was delighted. Ha! Thyestes, that idiot! I've got a golden fleece in my home right now, he thought. Restraining the pleasure on his face, Atreus calmly agreed and could not wait for the fall of Thyestes by his own words, leaving Atreus to finally be the ruler of Mycenae. And not wasting any time, Atreus ran to his home to collect this lamb and begin his new life as a king. But, he couldn't find it. There was no divine glow of golden fur on his bed, on the floor, under chairs, even outside. He tore that house apart, looking for any shred of golden fur. And after a while, he collapsed amongst the ruins of his man-made hurricane, destroying the interior of his home, pushing his hair back until it burnt his scalp. Thinking. When was the last time he saw that damn fleece? And then it clicked. Erope. Anger tightened the muscles in his back like the claws of a beast. But now was not the time to deal with that. I mean, there's still no evidence that she gave away or even sold the fleece. Atreus! He heard somewhere distant, and when he went outside, he saw Thyestes and the royal guards. Atreus felt the ground plummet between his feet, and his blood run cold. Thyestes had a golden fleece hung over his neck and a big grin plastered on his face. And before them all stood the new king of Mycenae, Thyestes. The end. Just kidding. I wish. Not only was Atreus not accepting this, but was already planning his next move on what he could do to reclaim that throne. But it was not just Atreus that wasn't accepting Thyestes as the new king of Mycenae, but the gods weren't in his favour either. Whether the gods genuinely wanted to help Atreus claim the lands of Mycenae, or simply they were entertained at such a show parting between the clouds as they dined, mere mortals like us will never understand. But they did send someone, Hermes to be exact, the messenger of the gods, to Atreus and to tell him, "Go to Thyestes," Hermes said, "and declare that the throne is rightfully yours. If by the will of Zeus the sun rises in the west and sets in the east." Agreeing to this, word by word, Atreus made his declaration and was met with a loud, cackling laugh from Thyestes. The ridiculousness and impossibility of this statement made him wonder if Atreus had truly lost his mind. Oh, such a joke just made my day, Thyestes thought, wiping a tear from the corner of his eye. Alright, sure, Atreus. If the sun defies all possibilities and rises in the west and sets in the east, by the will of the gods, you can have the throne. He dismissed Atreus with a wafting hand and encouraged his guards and servants to laugh along with him. Atreus clenched his fists so tight it nipped and tore into the palms of his hands. Walking away, he reminded himself to trust the gods and trust their message, and to wait and to see what would happen at sunrise. The next morning, Thyestes woke up at dawn, as he often liked to, as king of this land. It was the same fresh, dewy smell, the same flowers opening up, the same pastel-coloured sky, and the same sun that rose. But to his absolute horror, the shadows were speared in the wrong direction. The sun peaked over the wrong mountain. Thyestes watched, mouth gaping Helios's blazing chariot rise in the west, heading east. And to Atreus's glee, by the will of Zeus, and the audience that saw Thyestes agree to this declaration, Atreus was now the king of Mycenae. One would think that Atreus would be happy about this and would focus his intentions on being a great and righteous king. Don't be silly. This is a Greek myth after all. And Atreus, well, he was not a forgiving man. Nope. Sick to death by now of his little brother and his constant threat to take the throne. But not only that, Atreus by now was well aware of Europe's scandalous affair. And so, revenge was in order. Now, I want you to take a moment and think what you would do in this situation. You finally claimed the throne from your annoying little brother, whom not only was constantly fighting against you to take what you felt was rightfully yours, but was also sleeping with your wife. How would you take revenge? Let's be dramatic. For Greek mythology's sake. Exile him, perhaps? Maybe execute him, beat him to a pulp? Ooh, or push him off a cliff. You know, the classic. I want you to really think about the worst thing you would do. And hold on to that thought whilst I tell you what Atreus did. On this day, Atreus was feeling particularly calm, especially when he summoned Thyestes to the same throne room that he was laughed and mocked in a mere few weeks earlier. Brother, Atreus began, this rift between us has gone on long enough, don't you agree? Thyestes sucked in his cheek a little. Indeed, he said reluctantly. How would you feel about a truce? Allow me to prepare a feast for you as a sort of peace treaty. Thyestes was planning in his own way what he could do to win back that crown. But to keep up appearances and remove suspicions, he sighed and nodded. Sure, why not? It's a family recipe, so I'm sure you'll like it, Atreus said. Thyestes shrugged. Can't wait, Atreus smiled. Me neither. During the dinner, candles flickered and a gentle breeze pushed its way through the window. Atreus sat back and sipped his wine, watching Thyestes gobbling up his stew with enthusiastic spoonfuls, and then licking the bowl clean. Thyestes rested back, patting his belly, wiping his mouth with a cloth. That wasn't half bad, Thyestes said. You said this was a family recipe? Atreus smiled. Yes. Thyestes tilted his head, confused. But I haven't had this. This doesn't taste like anything that we had in Pisa. No, Atreus answered. It wouldn't. Thyestes raised a brow and glanced around before clearing his throat. Well, it's a shame your boys couldn't join us tonight with such a delicious feast. Indeed, Atreus nodded. At least your boys did, though. Thyestes' face slowly formed a frown. What do you mean by that? Atreus popped a quick laugh and beckoned in his servants. Holding a tray, they walk up to the table. Thyestes looks at what is on the tray, covers his mouth, and fell off his chair onto the ground. What is that? Was all he managed to say. Atreus looks at the platter of severed fingers and toes that were not cooked into the stew. Your sons, Atreus said. Thyestes wildly kicked away from them, shaking his head. No, what have you done? Revenge, Atreus spat, for all the times that you have crossed me, and a warning of what I am capable of if you do it again. Thyestes curled over, holding his stomach, feeling bile rise in his throat, he ran from the dining room. But the only thing he could think was how to get revenge on Atreus. I swear this family and their damn feasts. As for Erope, Atreus's wife, you may be wondering what happened to her after the affair. You know, it's been a running joke in these videos, so take a guess of what happened to her. And no, she wasn't cooked and eaten. That was reserved for the boys, apparently. But the other favourite, yes, that's right. Her betrayal got her thrown off a cliff. Another family favourite. So back to the brothers. Whatever implication that Atreus was intending by ending this feud, it had the exact opposite effect, as Thyestes' blood was now boiling with revenge. But to kill a king is no easy feat. He needed guidance. Someone to help him gain clarity on taking back the throne and giving Atreus a piece of his own medicine to avenge his children. So, Thyestes sought out an oracle. Yep, that's right. Those troublemakers. You know what this lady said? This oracle? You know what she said? I swear I'm about to lose it. You know the drill. Come closer. She gave him another one of those damned prophecies, which told him that if he had a child with his daughter, Pelopia, the son that would be born from the assault would grow up and kill Atreus. At the time though, Pelopia was not in Mycenae with her family. She was in Sicyon, within the court of King Thesprotus. Thyestes, being her father, was aware of her location, and when she was washing her hands after a sacrificial rite, shrouded in darkness and cloaked to hide his identity, he did as the oracle advised and assaulted his daughter. It's nearly over, it's nearly over. But it was during this assault that Pelopia, not knowing who this man was, stole his sword from his belt and kept it within her possession as a way to identify her attacker. After this deed, Thyestes gaps it, okay? He's out of there. He's gone to Delphi for refuge. Yeah, get out of here, Thyestes, no one wants you here. And Mycenae, it's not doing great. There's disease, there's droughts, there's famine, as punishment from the gods for what Atreus did to Thyestes' sons. I mean, we know how the gods feel about killing and eating children. Atreus' grandfather, Tantalus, he traumatized them, okay? They ain't gonna be so forgiving. So now, Atreus went to who? An oracle, revealing another damn prophecy. If Atreus was able to bring back Thyestes to Mycenae, the disease, the droughts, famine would be lifted. And so, the hunt is on. And Atreus is hot on Thyestes' tail and actually ends up in Sicyon in the presence of King Thesprotus. He asks him if he had seen his pesky brother Thyestes lurking around these parts. But it was during this meeting Atreus saw Pelopia, and in true Greek mythological fashion, he immediately fell in love with her and asked Thesprotus for her hand in marriage. Now, it is important to bear in mind that Atreus did not recognize Pelopia and did not know that this was his niece. And Thesprotus, for some reason, chose to not reveal this to him and instead permitted the marriage. Whether Pelopia was aware that Atreus was her uncle, it's not clear. but she was secretly pregnant with his brother and her father's baby. It's so messy. It's so messy. And during Pelopia's pregnancy, Atreus believed that this baby was his, right? But Pelopia was traumatized by how this baby came to be, that once the baby was born, she took him to a field and abandoned him, leaving only the sword from her attacker with the baby as she walks away. But fate is a tricky thing. And by the God's will, this boy would not die and would find his way back to Atreus. One day, a farmer comes along to tend to his fields when he finds a little baby boy survived by suckling on the milk of a goat. Along with the sword, the farmer gives this baby back to Atreus, relieved that his baby boy is safe and returned to him. He names him Aegisthus, which fittingly means male goat. Atreus raised Aegisthus as his own flesh and blood, believing that he was, right up to him becoming a bright young man. Now, Thyestes, he's still on the loose, and Mycenae is still struggling with disease and famine, but Atreus heard something from someone somewhere along the grapevine that pesky brother of his was in Delphi. Ha ha! At last we can bring that menace back, and Mycenae and all of its problems will be fixed. Remember, Atreus had 2 sons from his previous marriage with Erope, you know, before he pushed her off a cliff? Well, Atreus sends these 2 sons to Delphi to retrieve Thyestes, a mission in which they succeeded in. And with Thyestes finally back in Mycenae and held as a prisoner, water poured, crops grew, and finally, after many years, the people returned back to their plump-faced selves. And now Atreus could finish his business with Thyestes once and for all. Atreus turns to Aegisthus, the goat boy, and says, "You're a man now. Do the honor of our kingdom and execute this treacherous brother of mine." Aegisthus was all too willing to prove himself to his father and accepted the responsibility of this execution. But you know how they say, if you want a job done right, you should do it yourself. Perhaps this was advice that Atreus should have followed. Dun dun dun. Whilst in the dungeons, Thyestes was chained to a wall, looking up at the young man approaching sword in hand. Thyestes scoffed. "I thought Atreus would be personally executing me. My father has asked me to do it in his stead." Aegisthus replies. "Sword?" Thyestes asked, hopefully. Aegisthus nodded. "Good," Thyestes whispered. But as Aegisthus unsheathed the sword, Thyestes saw the familiar handle and the blade. He recognized every single detail in that metal and knew that it was his. "Where did you get that sword?" Thyestes asked in a rush. Aegisthus frowned. "It was my father's." "Did Atreus tell you that?" "No, my mother did." Thyestes' eyes wavered, his tone slowing. "Is your mother named Pelopia?" Aegisthus swallowed, still frowning. "How did you know that?" Thyestes did not break his gaze as he said, "Because I know your mother, and that is my sword." Aegisthus shook his head in denial. Thyestes collected his thoughts all too quick and fast. This boy was still young, and he could use that against him. Thinking of the prophecy, he could use this to maybe even get out of here alive. And all he has to do is tell the truth. Atreus has been lying to you for years. He is not your father. I am. Oh yes, we're dealing with the OG I am your father. No! no. Aegisthus started shaking his head. No, I'm just kidding. No, that isn't true. Go to Pelopia, go and ask her, and then you will know that I am not lying and that this is the truth. Aegisthus leaves quickly to find his mother and ask her if this was true. And once Pelopia discovers that her attacker that night was her father, she grabs the sword from her son and herself with it. And after a moment or two of silence, and feeling that his world had just crumbled around him, Aegisthus takes this bloody sword to Atreus as evidence that his execution of Thyestes was successful. And Atreus was rejoiced. Haha, yes, good news everyone. Finally that devilish brother was gone for good. Atreus drank some wine, had a laugh, sacrificed some goats, you know. It was just a good day in general. But animosity towards Atreus had filled within Aegisthus, and he could hear his true father's words, well, technically his grandfather too. What is with this story? Flooding in and out of his ears and in his mind, all at the same time, all on top of each other. That Atreus had lied to him all these years, that Atreus had deceived him, that he should kill Atreus and then he could rule the lands of Mycenae with his true father. So, as Atreus was washing his hands in a river to clean off all the celebratory blood that he had shed, Aegisthus approached him from behind and stabbed him in the back until Atreus died. Finally, at long last, Thyestes took the throne of Mycenae with Aegisthus by his side. And as for Atreus's two sons that I have mentioned a few times, the ones that as well brought Thyestes back to Mycenae from Delphi, well, Thyestes exiled them from Mycenae to Sparta. And it was from Sparta that these two sons would become involved in possibly the most famous Greek myth of all, as one of the sons married Helen, the same Helen who got kidnapped by Paris to Troy, thus beginning the Trojan War. Yes, Atreus' sons were named Menelaus and Agamemnon. And that was the third generation of the curse of the House of Atreus. From my research, the curse was responsible for the two sons' misfortune, from their prophecies to their being led astray, led against each other. This isn't the end of the curse, for the curse does not die until the family line does. And I believe after Agamemnon and Menelaus, there's another 1 or 2 generations. So it just keeps going, blazing a path of destruction in all the lives that it touches as it goes on. But for now, we'll end the curse here and pick it up again at a later stage. As for Agamemnon and Menelaus, are such big names in Greek mythology, and I kind of want to figure out which angle to take their story in. So I'm going to do some other myths and probably revisit this again at a later stage. So how did we feel about the curse of Atreus? I would love to hear from you in the comments below, and any future recommendation with any myth at all that you would like me to rewrite and retell as a story. I'd love to hear from you. But most of all, thank you for joining me here today. I hope you had a great time. Have a lovely day, night, afternoon, and I'll see you next time. Bye.